Today we're talking about Hxtal, which some of you know. It's a two-part epoxy resin. This is it. I like to keep it in here because I don't think it should be fluctuating temperatures. If you can just keep it not too hot or not too cold, I think it's better for it. It's really stable. We use it because it's not affected by UV rays. And it's stable because all the impurities and the metal ions have been taken out of it, so it's not affected. It has the same refractive index as glass, which means it transmits light the same way. So cleaning the piece, I have a couple pieces. This is from Downingtown. And it's a pretty clean break. So like when you're in the tanks, or if you're gluing something, you want to make sure that you don't have like excess cement on it, because sometimes you accidentally leave it on and it could somehow make it unlevel. So you want to make sure everything's off for the most part. And it has some chunks, but I think for the most part it's okay. You want to make sure your label's out of the way. So what I do is you clean the break and then clean the area surrounding it on the top and the bottom, because when you're putting your tape on, you want it to be a really tight fit and you don't want any dust or anything getting in the way.
What do you clean it with?
I'm cleaning it with rubbing alcohol, and it's like 70% one is what we have. They recommend like the 90%, but it's okay. You just have to make sure that there's not like a haze on it after you're done cleaning, and make sure it fully evaporates before you start taping it together. So when you use your Q-tips, you want to make sure you keep like rolling it so you're not using the dirty part that you're cleaning it over and over. You want to remove the dirt from all the sides and where the tape's going to be. Okay, and usually I do this on glass so it will evaporate off and it doesn't mess up your paper. I like to work on white paper so you can kind of see what you've got going on, as opposed to like the light boxes, which have stuff or gouges in them from over the years. This is just like a clean area. Okay, so for taping, I've learned a couple different ways, and this is the way that works best for me. And usually, I just tape on one side when I apply the Hxtal. So as it's set in the kiln, it depends which way it's easier to line up your piece. So that way it's like a bit off, so I don't think I'd do it that way, but this. So you kind of want to get it so you can line it up and hold it tightly. And this is just like Scotch tape, and I put it on a piece of glass and cut it out. So you have these little straps. This can be helpful if it's like multiple breaks, so you have lots of little pieces. You can kind of get what sticking order works. You want to put down the one side of the tape and then like a little bandage pull it over. If that makes sense, can you see? And like I said, this is quite an easy little break, so I'll just do two. And then flip it, holding both sides carefully, and put a few more straps on that side. My new trick that I've just learned is Hxtal can sometimes, depending on the paint, it can stain like the top side of the paint. So I like to apply the glue from the bottom side, so it'll clean off nicer, and then there's no residue left at all on the front side of the paint. So we'll remove the first straps. So when I apply the tape, you want to center it on the break.
And that's just Scotch tape? This is just Scotch tape, yeah.
And I use this because, like, the tape is going to With the other tape, I find that it does have a lot of stretch to it, but the way I glue, I don't need a lot of stretch, and I kind of want it to be a bit rigid. But it's not good for like protecting it. So after all of this, I'll take all this tape off because it breaks down really easily, Scotch tape, and I'll put that on both sides of it. And that's better to peel it off if you're on site, if somebody missed it, or when you're doing a final cleaning.
What kind of tape is the second?
Yeah, that's the kind that you've been using. Is that like the 3M?
The 3M stuff.
Yeah.
Scotch tape, yes.
So when I put this tape on, I kind of stick it on the table just to make sure it's, and then you can trim it back.
What's the blade that you're using?
Oh, this is a scalpel, just like conservation kind of thing that we use, but you can use an X-Acto knife as well. I like this one because it has like a rounded blade, so when you're doing that, this one has a tendency to split the tape. So, but an X-Acto knife is fine. We've got our tape on the front side, and there are two straps. So when you're doing this on the light box, sometimes it's difficult to see if you've still left your straps on. And you need to take them off, because if you don't, then glue is just going to go on top of them, and it's not very useful. It kind of gets in the way then. So take those off, and we'll mix some Hxtal. This is, I know like some of you have used it already. This is a digital scale. It's battery run, and it has a plug that I just left out there because it's just easier to use the battery. When you handle it, be sure to lift it up by the base and just really be gentle with it. Don't lift it up by the weighing scale, because that is when it can get uncalibrated and the measurements won't be right. And just try and keep it clean. These are little cups that we've gotten, which are over by the gluing station. So you put the cup on first, and then there's the tar, like T-A-R-E. So you zero it out. So that weighed 1.56, so now it's gone back to 0, so we can measure the Hxtal. When you mix Hxtal, you can keep it in the freezer up to a week after you've done it, but it needs to be in like a kind of sealed jar. You don't want to leave it for much longer than that, because the water kind of vapor can get in there and start messing with it. But you can keep it in the freezer, but I like to mix it in small enough quantities that you just kind of use it. So the ratio I use a lot is 1 gram to 0.3. So 1 gram to 0.3. And that's the 3-to-1 ratio. When you mix the Hxtal, I'm going to use a wooden kind of dowel, like barbecue stick. I know you'd used the copper rods in the past, but you just want to keep, you're supposed to ideally use like a glass rod, because you just want to keep the Hxtal as pure as you possibly can. The wood's okay, like if you get little pieces of wood in it, it doesn't really affect it. But the copper definitely would, and it would discolor it after a while. If you keep sticking a copper rod in there, it's going to keep leaving little parts of copper in there. So I zeroed it out again, and we're just going to get it up to 0.3. Okay. When you mix it, you want to do, I usually turn it to the side, and you just want to like fold it in really gently. You're trying to avoid bubbles. Whip it up, then you get lots of bubbles in it, and depending on the temperature of the Hxtal, the bubbles might not be able to escape. So it goes from like super clear to a bit cloudy back to clear. And once it goes back to clear, you know it's mixed well. It's okay. And then I would let it sit for a while as well, so the bubbles can come to the surface. We just got a couple packs of these, so I like to mix it with the flat end. and then apply it with the pointed end, because then it might not be well mixed on the end, and this way you have more control of where you're putting it. I had learned a couple different ways of doing this. Some people like to do dots because they think it's easier to clean up, and other people just draw on a line and leave it. I've tended to draw on a line and then hinge it just a little bit. Doing it this way, it gets in the crack by capillary action, which is the air in the crack is coming to the surface and then sucking the glue back down. So it's like an exchange. So that's how that works. But hinging it's just kind of nice because it kind of starts the process up for it. Sometimes you can't hinge it if you have like multiple breaks. It just won't move, which is fine. And then you want the Hxtal to be warmer, so it'll really get in there. If you have a fill to do, you want the Hxtal to either be a little bit set up, or you could stick it in the freezer, the refrigerator to cool it down, which makes it move slower. So just like that, and then I just bring up one side a little bit, and that way you can kind of see like if you're on it to begin with. And then it sucks it back down when you shut it. So this piece is pretty flat. It doesn't need any weights, but sometimes, like this guy was a little bit, he had a bit of a rock to him. So I like to put a piece of paper down and then put the weight on wherever in case you have a drip of Hxtal you didn't know about. And if you just put the weight on it, you might accidentally glue the weight to the piece of glass. So this one I had already taped up, and it's really quite broken, so I think we just did a recut on it anyway, but I just wanted to show you for beeswax, you can dam the edges so the glue doesn't flow out. So he's all taped up. If you can see, can you see how there's like missing glass?
You have the tape on the paint side, and you put the glue on the back side?
Yeah. So the beeswax, usually I stick it in my glove just to keep it warm while I'm taping things up. So what you want to do is, it's quite cold now, but warm it up, and then you're just forming a dam at the edge of it. And you want to make sure that you use your fingernail or whatever little tool you have, like to make sure it's pushed up. And the point of it is it just adds more stability to the glass. You could just glue that crack and it would be fine, but having that extra bit of Hxtal in there would just make it safer, I guess. So if you flip it around, you just want to make sure it's like you don't see a big gap there. And then you can use that cooler Hxtal to fill in that gap. Like, if you can come look later if you want, but I've done that on this guy. And like most of it's going to be under lead, but it's better for it. And when you do that, sometimes the Hxtal will flow out, or it does shrink a little tiny bit, so you can come back in maybe the first or second day and add just a touch more Hxtal to it to bring it back up to the glass level. Gluing it this way, you have obviously a big line of residue that you want to get rid of. So I glued these like 2 days ago, and the way you remove it, if you try and do it any time before like 2 days, it's just going to be a big sticky mess because it's not set up yet. But when you come in at the right time, like you kind of test it a little bit, it just peels off kind of like you're peeling a sunburn, or like glue, I guess. But like it comes off really easily, just like that. And then you have no cleanup. You can use either rubbing alcohol or acetone to get the residue off more, but anytime you get like a solvent around a glue that's still setting up, because it takes about a week for this to finally cure, even 2 weeks, you just don't want to introduce that because it could weaken the bond or so So it's quite clean, and that's on the back. As you can see, there's no residue. So here's the front side. And I like to razor blade that tape off as well. When you tape on the front, you want to make sure the paint is stable, because if it isn't, you could take it off, but I think that outweighs razor blading the glue off unstable paint, because you can take off more paint and do more damage. So I just like to pull it off really gently. You don't want to go in there and just go whoosh, because like it's still a joint that's setting up. So either like razor blade a little bit and pull it a little bit. But yeah, don't leave this tape on, because it's kind of a pain to get off. And I've heard from those on site, when I did leave it on when I first started here, it is a bit of a pain to get off when that stuff just comes off as one piece. And usually it comes off better than this. Okay. So after you take the tape off both sides, put this stuff on.
You leave that on until final cleaning?
Yeah.
You should repeat that question.
Oh. Yes, you leave this tape on until final cleaning, after cementing and barring and everything, just to protect it, just to make sure you don't get cement or flux in the brake. And then just trim it off. Okay.
How long does it have to be on a light box to be set well enough?
I would say it depends on the
Or you can
temperatures.
move it around?
So I would say probably 2 days in the winter before you'd scrape the glue off, 1 day in the summer. And then if you could leave it for another day, like usually I would have scraped it off, left it for another day, and then came back and put the protective tape on it. So, and then just be ginger with it. Like just, it's still setting up. It takes it 2 full weeks to set up, but
When can you start putting the piece in?
I would say maybe like after 4 days. You still have to be careful. Like leave it as long as you possibly can. If you could leave it over a weekend or over a week, that would be great. But I think it holds up, and the tape's quite thick, so as long as you're not super pushing on it, and when you do cement around it, whenever you see that tape, just be careful around it too, just to save yourself some hassle in case it breaks. But it would probably take a lot of force, because it is, I'd say it's set up enough at that point. Yeah? Okay. That's a wrap.
Yeah.